CS50, Harvard University's Introduction to the Intellectual Enterprises of Computer Science and the Art of Programming.
Dedicated and passionate and committed.
And duck face, David.
At the hackathon. I'm here today with about 4,000 students, and we're going to find out what they're up to, working on their final projects.
At this point in the night, we're starting to hit the coffee pretty hard.
Please choose quickly. There's a long line of people.
We are here at the 28th consecutive hour of the CSFP hackathon. Why do you laugh?
Why study computer science? Because it is the most important subject.
Really be mentally prepared, because you're going to love it.
Thank you. My name is David Malan. I teach CS50, and it was never part of my plan to study computer science at Harvard, let alone teach CS50. In fact, when I started off life here with Eric, I started off as a Gov concentrator, and the year was 1995, and I didn't really know what I wanted to study here at Harvard, and yet I always kind of liked history in high school. I really liked constitutional law, and so I stayed within this comfort zone of mine, and I took the concentration that felt like the closest match to that. And yet freshman year, even as I saw some of my friends taking this class called CS50, it never really seemed like a world for me. My recollections of computer science in high school were as this closed computer lab door with some of my geekier friends just kind of typing away and programming, and it never really had any allure for me. And in fact, if anything, I was pretty daunted by the reputation of the course and computer science more generally, thinking that it was filled with students who'd been programming since they were like 6 years old. And yet finally, sophomore year, I got curious about the class, and I finally got up the nerve to step foot in this classroom of CS50 as a sophomore, and it was only because the professor then allowed me to take the course pass-fail that I had sufficient confidence with which to explore what was still very unfamiliar waters for me. And much unlike I thought, it was very much instead about something that I might call computational thinking. See, computer science isn't about programming. That's certainly a tool that people bring to bear on problems, but it's ultimately about problem solving and thinking like a computer, if you will, and bringing a method and a careful thought to solving problems so that you can solve problems not only correctly, but quite efficiently. Now, even if you yourself don't think of yourself as a computer person, I dare say you're closer to that than you might think. And in fact, in just a few minutes, let's turn every one of you, if not already, into a computer person of sorts by distilling computer science, or really computational thinking, into just these three ideas. Computational thinking, or thinking like a computer, can be said to be the result of taking some inputs, whatever those are, running them through some algorithms or some process for solving problems, and producing outputs from them. But to do this, of course, we have to represent those inputs and outputs. So let's focus for a moment on a topic with which you're probably generally familiar, even if you don't quite understand how it could possibly be. And that thing being that computers only understand somehow zeros and ones, despite their power. They understand only the so-called binary system, whereas we humans understand what I'd call the decimal system, whereby our alphabet isn't just 0 and 1, it's 0 through 9. But computers still function in pretty much the same way as we humans, even we humans back in grade school. In fact, why does this sequence of digits, 1, 2, 3, represent the sort of higher level notion that we humans know as 123? Well, if you're like me, back in grade school, you probably thought of each of these digits as being in columns, where there's the ones place on the right, the tens place in the middle, the hundreds place on the left. And so why does 1, 2, 3 mean 123? Well, it's a simple bit of arithmetic. We've got 100 times 1, which of course is 100, then 10 times 2, which of course is 20, and then 1 times 3, which of course is 3, and so we get ultimately 123. So computers actually behave in fundamentally the same way, but instead of using powers of 10, 1 and 10 and 100 and 1,000, they instead use powers of 2, 1 and 2 and 4 and maybe 8 and 16 and so on. And so how might you represent the number 0 if you were a computer and could only speak binary? Well, just with 0, 0, 0, because if you multiply that out, it's of course 4 times 0 plus 2 times 0 plus 1 times 0 is 0. But what if you wanted to represent quite simply as a computer the number 1? How does the pattern have to change? From 0, 0, 0 to what instead? 0, 0, 1. And of course, to represent 2, you have to now change 2 of those binary digits, or bits, if you will. And of course, now we have 0, 1, 0. If we want to represent 3, we have this. If you want to represent 4, you have this, all the way up to 5 and 6 and 7. And finally, how do we represent, though, something like 8? What has to happen next? You sort of have to carry the 1, so to speak, and we need a 4th bit, and we don't have that on the screen here, but we certainly could. Now, of course, these are just letters on a screen, but how might we represent them as a physical device like a computer? Well, here's an idea. If we have here the representation physically of 3 bits, and they happen to be light bulbs, and you can think of these, therefore, as really big transistors, because indeed, even if you're not familiar with what that is, it's really just a switch, something that's on or off, a 1 or a 0, if you will, that's inside of a computer's CPU or brains. And so we can think of these light bulbs as being turned on and off to represent these 0s and 1s. And so if we want to represent something like the number 1, well, we simply turn this thing here on. If we want to represent something like 2, we have to toggle 2 of them. And if we want to go back to 3, or if we want to go back to 4, or 5, or 6, or finally 7, and of course, if we want 8, we need another bit still. So that's what's inside of a computer, but that's not all that interesting if all we can do is count up to 7. So surely we could layer or abstract away from this to something more interesting like letters, and in fact, that's exactly what computers do. Now that we have this system for representing information, numbers, well, why don't we just map numbers to letters so that if we wanted to express as a computer the message hi to an audience, well, what numbers would we simply encode the word hi? We somehow need a sequence of 0s and 1s that collectively represent an H, and then another sequence of 0s and 1s that collectively represent an I. And so what are the 2 numbers we would somehow have to encode in binary to say hi as a computer? Exactly, 72 and then 73, either using the same pattern of bits back to back, or maybe 2 sets of bits with which to represent those numbers. So if we now stipulate that we humans and we computers have a way of representing information, let's focus on the third and final ingredient into computational thinking and thinking like a computer, and that's an algorithm, a set of instructions for solving some problem. And I dare say that this, too, is not all that unfamiliar. Now, this particular incarnation of a problem might be increasingly unfamiliar, but this here is a phone book that has some 1,000 pages, and inside of which are a whole bunch of people's names and numbers. And now most of us here could probably find someone in this phone book pretty readily, but let's consider for a moment how you might do that, and how you might do that carefully and ultimately efficiently. Well, if I want to look up someone like Mike Smith in this phone book, I could certainly start at the first page and turn 1 page at a time, on each page looking for Mike Smith. This is a set of instructions. Keep turning the page. It's linear in the fact that I'm sort of going through it as a straight line. And is this algorithm for finding Mike Smith correct if I turn these pages 1 at a time? Yeah, it's correct, because if Mike Smith is in here, I'll eventually find him, if a bit slowly. And in fact, we might depict the efficiency of that algorithm with a line like this. If my x or horizontal axis here is the size of the problem, the number of pages in the phone book, and the y or vertical axis is the amount of time to solve a problem, like finding Mike Smith, there's this linear relationship whereby if the phone company increases the number of pages next year by 1, I might have to take 1 more page flip or moment of time to find someone like Mike Smith. But what if I want to do this fundamentally better? I could try doing not 1 at a time, but maybe 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, doubling my speed. Now, arguably, this too is correct so long as I'm careful with that last page, lest I overshoot Mike just a bit. But if we assume that I can handle that 1 corner case, this algorithm might be depicted in terms of its efficiency as this. It's still a straight line. It's yellow because it's a little better than the red. But if we have some specific number of pages, like 1,000 in the phone book, this second algorithm might take that much time to solve. And of course, the first algorithm, counting by 1s and not by 2s, might take twice as long instead. So if we have n pages, it might take n steps, n over 2 steps instead if we go by 2. But surely no human in this room is going to waste minutes at a time flipping through the phone book 1 or even 2 pages at a time. What's a typical human intuitively going to do? You go roughly to the middle, right? So you go roughly to the middle, and your intuition says that, all right, if I'm now in the M section, roughly halfway through the alphabet, I know surely that Mike is not to the left of this problem anymore, and so both figuratively and literally, we can tear the problem in half, throw half of the problem away, thereby leaving me with fundamentally the same problem, but one that's half as big. And so what's, again, your intuition for finding Mike next? Roughly half here, and I see, damn, I've overshot it by a little bit. I'm in the T section, but again, I can tear the problem in half, leaving myself now with a problem that's a quarter of the size, and if I continue this process again and again and again, hopefully I'll ultimately be left with just 1 page. Now, is this algorithm also correct? Yeah, because if Mike Smith is in the phone book, I'll eventually find him. It's not a particularly reusable algorithm, but if Mike is in there, we'll find him. And we might depict now the efficiency of this algorithm as a fundamentally different shape. The fancy way of saying that would be a logarithmic shape, but the key here is that what's powerful about that algorithm, which I dare say is intuitively accessible to all of us already, is that if the phone book company doesn't just add 1 page next year, but like doubles the number of pages in the phone book, no big deal. That's 1 additional terror, 1 additional step, and I can consume a problem that's twice as large. Now, extrapolate that efficiency to something like a massive database of web pages or medical records or anything else that's germane to problems today, and you can appreciate perhaps just the applicability of the efficiency of algorithms. And indeed, that's what computer science is ultimately mostly about. It's about solving problems and bringing these tools and techniques to bear to completely different fields. In fact, within computer science, we even say that CS tends not to have its own exclusive domain, but rather its importance stems from its applicability to these other fields, whether those fields are the arts or business or engineering, humanities, law, medicine, sciences, applied sciences, social sciences, and indeed, per the video you saw a moment ago, the students who fill the room at this so-called CS50 fair at the end of the semester are primarily not computer science concentrators, but students from every concentration at Harvard. In fact, among the audience this past year was Erica in psychology and Shori in neurobiology, whose final project in CS50 was a website via which their classmates could solicit a hand with certain tasks from other students. Here was Emily in molecular and cellular biology, and Angela, who did a web app for making a do-it-yourself food recipes based on what was actually being served in the D hall. Here was Jennifer in applied math, and Kevin, whose project analyzed the properties of natural human language to make them more efficient for both humans and machines to learn. And then here is Andy, or at least his hand, hovering over his computer because his final project, he being from biomedical engineering, was a motion-controlled virtual keyboard, so that when Andy hovered his hand over his Mac there, it actually played notes on a virtual screen. And therefore, no matter the background that students have in this class, they ultimately all get to say that I took CS50. And in fact, if you'd like to meet some of those very students, do join us at CS50's table at the Extracurricular Activities Fair right after this up at the Quad in the so-called SOC anytime before 5:30 p.m. today. But first, and finally, the world's premiere of a music video, the intersection of computer science and music, if you will, that tells the tale of a former CS50 student turned teaching fellow on her way to CS50 for the very first time in this very same theater. This is Feeling Good, featuring CS50's own Zamaila Chan and our friends, the Harvard Radcliffe Veritones.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea, you know how I feel. River running free, Oh, for me. Stars, when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel. Oh, freedom is mine, and I know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. I feel so good. I feel so
He is the flame, he draws me in, that burns within.